There is not the one perfect setting on the Ace Pro that is best for all situations. Today I'm going to explain what changes you need to make depending on the situation to get the best possible results. This video is divided into 10 parts because I will discuss the 10 most important settings. Today we will focus on the video mode. Actually, there are 3 different video modes: video, pure video and the free frame video mode. The pure video mode is intended for shots in low light conditions, in other words for shots in the evening, but also for shots indoors in artificial light. Here, the exposure is optimally set for low light conditions and any possible image noise is efficiently removed with the help of AI. In low light, you should therefore always use the pure video mode for optimum results. In free frame video mode, on the other hand, the unstabilized recordings of the Ace Pro are saved without cropping. You can then stabilize the shots in the app and freely determine the field of view, so whether you want to have a horizontal shot or a vertical shot, and how wide the field of view of the shot should be. This is great if when taking the shot you are not yet sure which format you need or which field of view would be optimal. Or for example, if you are mounting the Ace Pro on a drone. But be careful, the freedom of the free frame mode does not come without a price. You cannot use your shots without editing and you have to select the desired field of view for each shot in the app. Nevertheless, it is a very useful feature. Both free frame mode and pure video mode come with a few restrictions when it comes to the settings. I'll tell you what these are a little later. For now, let's switch to the standard video mode and take a look at the best settings for optimum image quality. The most important recording settings concern the resolution and the frame rate. These two settings should be considered together, as the possible frame rates depend on the resolution. The Ace Pro is the first high-quality action camera that enables recording in 8K. However, you should know the following about shooting in 8K. The Ace Pro features a high-resolution 48-megapixel quad-Bayer sensor. When recording in 4K, 4 pixels are grouped together and treated as a single large pixel. This allows more information and more light to be captured per pixel. The image quality improves. Although recordings in 8K are slightly more detailed, they are only recommended in very good lighting conditions. Recordings in 8K also consume a lot of energy, generate large files, and are difficult for most PCs to process. The Ace Pro also only supports a frame rate of 24 frames per second in 8K, which in my opinion is not very suitable for action shots. For optimal results, I would therefore recommend a resolution of 4K in most cases. There are several frame rates available in 4K. In general, the more frames per second, the smoother your recording will look. 24 frames per second do not look very smooth, but most professional movies are shot at this frame rate. So a frame rate of 24 frames per second is considered particularly cinematic. But be aware, if you don't use ND filters, such a low frame rate leads to a very choppy and nervous look, especially when there is a lot of movement. I also think that shooting with action cameras is usually not about creating a particularly cinematic look. Rather, you want to capture your sports or travel activities as naturally as possible. For these type of shots, I therefore recommend a higher frame rate of at least 30 or even 50 or 60 frames per second. For lots of action and cool slow motion shots, you should use 120 frames per second. It looks really great. For an even higher frame rate of up to 240 frames per second, the resolution must be reduced to 1080, but I would not recommend this. The image quality no longer looks good in this setting. Regardless of whether it is 120, 60 or 50 frames per second, you should know a few things when using a high frame rate. A high frame rate not only requires more energy and memory, it's also not as suitable for shooting in low light. Apart from the fact that you should always use the pure video mode in low light, the camera can capture more light when using a low frame rate. This is also why a maximum frame rate of up to 30 frames per second is available in pure video mode. And this should also be the maximum in low light conditions. And a high frame rate on the Ace Pro has another disadvantage. The active HDR mode is only available for frame rates of up to 30 frames per second. You can switch the HDR mode on and off here at the top right. We should therefore ask ourselves whether it makes sense to activate active HDR on the Ace Pro. In the case of HDR, images with different exposure settings are layered on top of each other, resulting in a significantly higher dynamic range. This means that more details can be displayed simultaneously in the very dark and very bright areas of the image. The highlights in particular, so the very bright areas of the image, are well protected and there are no more burnt out areas in the image. image. This is a feature that can also be extremely useful on an action camera, for example when riding a bike through a forest. However, there are cameras where the HDR mode comes with a number of disadvantages. This can be higher image noise, a very unnatural look, or poorer stabilization. None of this is the case with the Ace Pro. HDR on the Ace Pro looks very contrasty and natural. I am therefore a big fan of the HDR mode on the Ace Pro. To summarize, I would therefore use the following resolution and frame rate: 4K and 30 frames per second with HDR activated as the default setting. If you need particularly smooth recordings, for example for sports or underwater, 50 or 60 frames per second. For slow motion recordings, 4K and 120 frames per second. 24 and 25 frames per second only for the very special case that you want to create a cinematic look. In this case, however, you should also use ND filters to get a little more motion blur. And you should also be aware that the stabilization could suffer as a result. By the way, frame rates of 25, 50 and 100 frames per second are intended for the PAL region, so for most countries outside the US and Canada. In the PAL region, you should use these frame rates to avoid flickering problems in artificial light. And there's another rule you should follow. If you want to put together a longer video from several clips, apart from slow motion recordings, you should stick to a standard frame rate and not mix different frame rates together. This could lead to strange image jumps. For the stabilization, you can choose between the settings standard, low and high. In most cases, I would recommend standard. In the case of low, the stabilization is often too weak in my opinion and jerks can occur very quickly. High, on the other hand, leads to a relatively strong crop, whereby you should know that the Ace Pro crops the image dynamically. The image is therefore only cropped when there is movement in the shot. This also applies to the setting standard. In most cases, you will take shots with a format of 16:9. This is the standard aspect ratio for horizontal videos. For particularly cinematic shots, you can use an aspect ratio of 2.35:1, which is a widescreen format that corresponds to the aspect ratio of professional movies. However, this is only available in a resolution of 8K and 24 frames per second. If on the other hand you want to take vertical videos in portrait mode, simply keep the Ace Pro upright. And there is another very important setting that we need to discuss in detail: the optimal field of view. The default field of view on the Ace Pro is Ultra. Ultra is very suitable for most action and sports shots. It is a very wide field of view, which due to the fisheye lens leads to relatively strong distortions. If you want to reduce the distortions, for example when vlogging or when a straight horizon can be seen in the shot, then you should use D-Warp. In the case of D-Warp, the distortions of the lens are compensated. For this, the image is slightly cropped. However, I personally use Action View much more often than D-Warp. In the case of Action View, the vertical viewing angle is significantly bigger than in the case of Ultra. Although there is even more distortion, the field of view is larger at the top and bottom. This setting is particularly suitable for POV shots, so if you are using your camera on a helmet or chest mount, or even if you are filming yourself with a pole and want to get yourself fully in the frame. On the other hand, I rarely use horizon lock. Here the camera tries to keep the horizon straight, even though you turn it to the left or right. This leads to a particularly well stabilized shot, but also to a very strong crop. Incidentally, the Ace Pro also supports a 360-degree horizon lock, whereby the camera can be rotated completely around its own axis, but the horizon always remains straight. However, this setting is only available in the free-frame video mode. And in connection with the field of view, the Ace Pro has another interesting feature that you should consider if needed. If you want to get closer to your subject, you should activate the clear image zoom via the icon with the two arrows or by double tapping the screen. This results in a 2x zoom, but it's not just a simple digital crop. The high resolution sensor of the Ace Pro enables an almost lossless 2x zoom. A shot taken with clear image zoom therefore looks significantly better than if you were to crop your shot in post. You should take this into account when shooting. The colors of the Ace Pro already look very good in the standard settings. However, if you want to edit the colors of your shots, you should use a flat color profile. To do this, swipe from the right edge to the left. You can set the color profile via the first icon at the top left. In addition to standard, there are also vivid, flat and a range of filters for very specific use cases. As I said, if you want to color grade your shot, you should select flat. This gives you a little more flexibility for color grading. vibrating. However, when using flat, you cannot use your recordings directly. You have to edit each individual shot and add contrast and saturation. Vivid, on the other hand, only contains a little more saturation than the standard color profile. Personally, that's a bit too much for me. Compared to Vivid, I prefer the standard profile on the Ace Pro, and I would rather do without the filters for optimum image quality. And there are a number of other settings in this menu that you can adjust to improve the quality of your shots, depending on the situation. Here on the right with M, you can even set the exposure completely manually. However, as I usually move around a lot with an action camera, I hardly ever use this function. But there are also a few important features in the automatic settings that you should be aware of. If you can't use the HDR mode, for example when shooting at 60 frames per second, the bright areas in the image may burn out because the overall exposure could be a little too bright. To prevent this, you can correct the automatic exposure via EV. To protect the highlights a little better, you could set a slightly negative value here, for example -0.5. One reason for the too bright exposure could also be that you have activated phase priority and are backlit. With phase priority, the automatic exposure is based on your face. This can be changed by activating matrix. Now, the exposure will no longer be based on your face. Nevertheless, I am of the opinion that phase priority usually leads to very good results, especially if you're filming yourself. In low light, the Ace Pro uses longer exposure times to let more light in. This leads to more motion blur and worse stabilization. If well-stabilized shots are important to you even in low light conditions, you should activate low light stabilization. But be careful, this will lead to more image noise and an overall poorer image quality. When taking long shots, the camera may change the white balance for no apparent reason. This in turn does not look good, and you can prevent this by setting the white balance manually. However, the automatic white balance of the Ace Pro works very well, and I therefore only use this setting very rarely. In my opinion, the sharpness setting is much more important. Like any digital camera, the Ace Pro increases the contrast at the edges to make the details more visible. However, this can lead to a very digital and artificial look. For this reason, I reduce the sharpness, in the best case to low. However, the shot will then look very soft and you will have to add some sharpness in post. If you don't want to edit your shots, then use medium here. This is perfectly sufficient. The Ace Pro has another unique feature that you should definitely know how it works: the AI Highlights Assistant. This analyzes the footage in real time, uses AI to identify important subjects and moments during the recording and sets them as highlights. This makes it easier to automatically create edits with the Insta360 app. You can also edit the created highlights and manually add new highlights. And you should also know that this feature is relatively energy intensive. Therefore, if you do not intend to automatically create an edit using the app and do not need the automatic recognition of highlights, you should deactivate it. The AI Highlights Assistant is not available in pure video mode. This also applies to a number of other settings. In pure video mode, the setting low light stabilization is of course available, but you can't adjust the settings for the stabilization, sharpness or color. There is also no HDR mode and you cannot set the exposure manually. Nevertheless, you should definitely use this shooting mode in low light. In free-frame video mode, on the other hand, HDR has now been added. However, there are no frame rates above 60 and only a resolution of 4K is available. Apart from slow motion, everything important is therefore available. Stabilization and field of view are set in the app. And there are two more important settings we should discuss. To do this, open the settings menu and image settings. I told you earlier that frame rates like 25 or 50 frames per second are meant for the PAL region. Normally, you should use these frame rates in the PAL region to avoid flickering problems in artificial light. However, if auto is activated here, you can also shoot in the PAL region at 30 frames per second, for example, without necessarily having flickering issues. The camera will try to set a suitable shutter speed. For optimum image quality, you should also make sure that the bitrate is set to high. This is the only way to guarantee that as much data as possible is captured and saved. I can only recommend standard if you are traveling, taking a lot of shots and therefore need to save storage space. A high bitrate requires more storage space and the difference in image quality is not always noticeable. Nevertheless, I would normally use high. Your Ace Pro is now perfectly set up. You can now save your settings as a preset by tapping on preset in the menu of the recording modes. And then on the plus on the far right. Select a name and you can now quickly call up your settings via the presets menu. If you want to learn more about the other features of the Ace Pro, check out my full tutorial on the Ace Pro and give me a like as feedback if you found this video useful. There will be more videos on the Ace Pro to come, so stay tuned and see you next time.